The first Friday after arriving in Bandaka was unlike any Friday I had ever experienced. According to the UN office schedule, it was supposed to be a regular working day. However, since Friday holds religious significance for us Muslims, my colleagues and I left the office to attend Juma prayers at a local mosque. I made sure to leave one staff member behind to handle calls and messages. It's said that about 20% of Bandaka's population follows Islam, and there are only 5 mosques across the city. The mosque I visited was considered the largest and also popular among UN staff. Expecting a grand structure, I was surprised to find a modest, single-story building with space for about 500 worshippers. On one side, there was a section designated for women. What struck me most was the significant number of women attending prayers, many with young children who made lively noises throughout the prayer hall. Some women wore traditional Islamic coverings, while others attended without any veil at all, a sight unfamiliar yet refreshing to me. A peculiar practice caught my attention as I looked around the men's section. Many worshippers sat on the floor with their legs stretched straight out toward the Qibla, which in Bandaka faced east. This made me uneasy, as back home I had always learned that stretching your feet toward the Qibla was disrespectful. My interpreter, George Mabu, later explained the cultural context. He shared an interesting fact. African mothers often tie their infants to their backs with cloth wraps while working around the house or even in the fields. As a result, children spend much of their early years with their legs hanging on either side of their mother's back. This upbringing naturally makes sitting cross-legged uncomfortable for many Congolese adults, and stretching out their legs becomes a necessity rather than a choice. Another fascinating aspect was the khutbah, delivered by the imam in the Lingala language. With fiery passion, he spoke as though giving a motivational speech, though I couldn't understand a single word except for one recurring term, Zambe. I later learned that it meant God in Lingala. What surprised me even more was the presence of nearly 100 Indian worshippers at the mosque. Over time, I discovered their compelling history. These families, mostly from Gujarat, had settled in Bandaka and other parts of Congo over the last 50 years, tracing their roots back to the 18th century when Indians migrated to Africa seeking economic opportunities. Through Sheikh Riaz, an IT specialist from India working with the UN, I got acquainted with this close-knit Gujarati Muslim community. They owned and operated most of Bandaka's departmental stores, playing a crucial role in keeping the local economy afloat despite the challenges of the war-torn region. Riaz explained that nearly 50 Gujarati families now lived in Bandaka, many of them descendants of the original settlers. Every year, they brought new faces from India to help manage businesses and homes, creating a self-sustaining community. The younger generation was steadily growing, becoming an integral part of Mbandaka's social and economic fabric. Friday prayers became a weekly ritual where I not only connected with fellow peacekeepers, but also found solace in this vibrant mix of cultures and traditions. Each visit to the mosque opened up new perspectives on resilience, adaptability, and faith amid the unpredictable challenges of life in a peacekeeping mission. Every Sunday, on our day off, Sheikh Riaz and I would head to the local university ground to play cricket with the Indian expats. Over time, this weekly ritual helped me build a camaraderie with them, making my days in Mbandaka a little more engaging. Days passed in this rhythm, and before I knew it, 2 months had slipped by since I arrived. Then came the holy month of Ramadan, my first time fasting away from home. At first, it was a bit challenging to adjust, but soon everything fell into a routine. One thing that truly touched my heart was the deep respect for religious values I witnessed among my colleagues. During our central briefings in the conference room, our non-Muslim coworkers, out of consideration for us, would refrain from drinking beer or even water in our presence. They knew we were fasting, and their gesture of respect was both surprising and heartwarming. We, in turn, tried to reciprocate this mutual respect. We avoided approaching them during their mealtimes or discussing work while they were eating. This silent understanding, this unspoken yet profound respect for each other's beliefs, made the UN workplace feel more like a shared space of harmony rather than just an international organization. Seeing such religious sensitivity among UN staff gave me a newfound appreciation for the bond beyond borders. Every evening in our camp, we would host an iftar gathering, inviting both Muslim and non-Muslim staff. Everyone joined with enthusiasm, sharing the spirit of the holy month. After iftar, Muslims from different countries would come together in the camp's prayer room for Taraweeh prayers. One striking observation was how our prayer styles differed. Those from the Indian subcontinent prayed with their hands folded, while African Muslims let their hands rest at their sides. Yet, despite these differences, we all stood united in our faith, worshiping the same Almighty. What captivated me the most was the soulful recitation of the Quran by the Imam of Bandaka's mosque. His voice carried such depth and emotion that it moved the congregation to tears, especially during the Friday prayers. The moment he recited, the mosque would be filled with an overwhelming sense of spirituality, and none of us could hold back our emotions. Curious about him, I asked the local Muslims about his background. What I learned left me in awe. This imam had once walked for 6 long months, barefoot, to reach Medina due to financial hardship. There, he spent several years studying the Quran and Hadith, only to return the same way, on foot, to his hometown, determined to spread the light of Islam in Bandaka. His life's sole purpose was to guide the Muslims of this remote town back to their faith. Hearing his story, I felt compelled to meet him. Since he didn't understand English, I asked my translator, George Mobowu, to wait for me outside the mosque after the Friday prayer. As I approached the imam, I greeted him with the utmost respect and asked a question that had been weighing on my mind. Sheikh, you have taken on such a great responsibility, leading prayers and guiding people towards Islam. But I have noticed something strange. Despite coming here regularly for Jumu'ah and other prayers, I haven't seen a single Quran or any Islamic books in the mosque, not even in French. Why is that? Upon hearing my question, the imam's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He spoke in French, his voice heavy with emotion. As he spoke, I watched the sorrow settle on his face. George translated his words for me. I did not have the means to carry books with me from Medina on my long journey back. This town's Muslims have drifted far from the true teachings of Islam. Many have even forgotten how to pray. Since there are no Qurans available in French, I teach them purely from my memory. But my memory alone is not enough. They need to read, to understand, to truly know their faith. His words weighed on my heart. Here was a man who had sacrificed everything for his people, struggling alone in an environment where no one stood beside him. I knew then that I had to do something. A silent promise formed within me. When I returned to Bangladesh on leave, I would find and bring French-translated Qurans for the mosques of Bandaka. This imam and the Muslims of this forgotten land deserved that much at the very least. After a long month of fasting, the day of Eid finally arrived. That morning, we gathered in the camp kitchen to prepare and enjoy a simple Eid breakfast, sweet semai, a small taste of home in this foreign land. Though military life had accustomed us to spending one Eid with family and the other in the barracks, this time, being thousands of miles away from home, the ache of separation felt stronger than ever. Leaving a few soldiers on duty, the rest of us set out at 8 a.m. for the local mosque to perform the Eid prayer. Upon arrival, we found the mosque overflowing with worshippers, but fortune was on our side. We managed to find a spot to sit. The courtyard had been arranged to accommodate the large congregation, and as the prayer concluded, the imam delivered the Eid sermon, followed by a heartfelt dua. As I raised my hands in prayer, an unexpected wave of emotions washed over me. I thought of my father, whom I had lost just a year ago. I thought of my mother, my wife, my children, and my loved ones back home. The weight of distance pressed heavily on my heart, and before I realized it, a warm tear rolled down my cheek. After the prayer, we stepped out into the mosque courtyard, where Congolese Muslims, their faces beaming with joy, approached us with open arms. They embraced us one by one, their warmth momentarily, making us forget that we were in a land far from our own. Soon, familiar faces from the local Indian Gujrati community joined in, exchanging greetings and hugs. Thanks to our regular Sunday cricket matches, I had already built a friendly rapport with them, and today, that camaraderie felt even stronger. As the congregation slowly dispersed, one of my Gujarati friends approached me. "Captain Ashik, would you be willing to meet one of our elders? He wishes to speak with you," he asked. Curious, I followed him to a corner of the mosque courtyard where a small group of elderly Indian men stood in a circle. I greeted them, and they responded with warm smiles. The eldest among them, a dignified man in his 80s with a long, flowing white beard, introduced himself as Akram Khan, the patriarch of the local Indian community. "Would you do us the honor of joining us in our neighborhood to share in our Eid celebration?" he asked through an interpreter. The historian in me was intrigued. How had these Gujarati families come to settle in Bandaka? What was their way of life like? The opportunity to learn about them firsthand was too tempting to resist. Moreover, their warmth and hospitality left no room for hesitation. I accepted his invitation, promising to return that evening. The day passed in the camp, filled with conversations with soldiers and a brief Skype call with my family back home. During lunch, I hosted a few UN staff members, sharing a meal together. As the afternoon waned, exhaustion took over, and I succumbed to a deep slumber. By evening, I was refreshed and ready for the night's gathering. I left with a few colleagues and arrived at the Gujarati neighborhood, where Akram Khan, the head of the Gujrati family, stood at the entrance, waiting to welcome us. He embraced us with genuine warmth and led us inside. The vast courtyard, encircled by traditional Indian-style houses, was adorned with colorful lights and decorated like a wedding venue. A grand canopy stood in the center, dividing the space into two sections, one for men and the other for women. As we were ushered to our seats at a large round table, I was informed that I was the evening's guest of honor. Looking around, I saw nearly 150 men seated under the canopy, while from the other side, the lively murmurs of women reached our ears. Occasionally, I felt curious glances from beyond the partition. Akram Khan, seated beside me, inquired about my family and extended Eid greetings to them. Our conversation shifted to the current situation in Congo, exchanging perspectives on the region's struggles and resilience. Soon, large platters of food arrived at our table: fragrant biryani, tender mutton razala, spiced chicken roast, an assortment of pickles, and, to top it all off, borhani and sweet jorda. Before we had even begun, we had already enjoyed refreshing fruit juices. As I took my first bite, I was transported home. The flavors were so authentic that it felt as though I were celebrating Eid in Dhaka. Seeing our evident satisfaction, Akram Khan repeatedly inquired, through the interpreter, if everything was to our liking. Assured by our delighted expressions, he finally relaxed, pleased that we were enjoying the meal. Once we had finished eating, a thought crossed my mind. As a military officer, gratitude and discipline were ingrained in me. It felt only right to thank the people who had prepared this feast. I turned to Akram Khan and asked if I could personally express my appreciation to the cooks. He smiled, nodded, and gestured to someone nearby. A few moments later, he led me to the partition's edge and spoke softly to someone beyond it. I heard hushed female voices before a woman replied in Gujarati. Then, with a simple nod, Akram Khan guided me inside the women's section, accompanied only by my interpreter. There, I was greeted by several elderly women, their faces beaming with kindness. I offered them my salam, which they warmly returned. Through the interpreter, they asked me about the meal, curious if the dishes resembled those in Bangladesh. Their questions came in rapid succession. Did our women cook the same way? Did I enjoy the flavors? What was my favorite dish? As I answered, I noticed young girls are peeking from behind another curtain, giggling softly at our interaction. I assured them that the food had been incredible, that it had transported me home for a brief moment. But more than the food, their hospitality had reminded me of something far deeper. For a fleeting moment tonight, I said, we found our mothers in you. Your kindness, your warmth, your care, it made us feel as if we were home. For that, we will always be grateful. As the interpreter relayed my words, I saw the women's eyes glisten with unshed tears. Some wiped their eyes with the corners of their scarves. In that moment, the foreign land felt less distant, and the bonds of humanity felt stronger than ever. As I prepared to leave, Akram Khan embraced me once more, his grip infused with unspoken affection. At the doorway, the entire community, men, women, and children, stood in their Eid finery, waving at us. I raised my hand in farewell, the warmth of their hospitality lingering in my heart. As our vehicle rolled away, I cast one last glance at the glowing lights of their homes. I had promised to return, believing that I would visit them again. But fate had other plans. Circumstances prevented me from ever revisiting that extraordinary gathering. Yet to this day, the memory of that distant Eid remains vivid. The taste of familiar flavors, the embrace of newfound kin, and the warmth of Gujarati mothers who, for one evening, reminded me of my own.